Hello, I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Good health is not the absence of illness, and good mental health is not the absence of anxiety. We talk a lot about anxiety here on this podcast. It's a topic, as you know, that is very dear to my heart, and we know we can't get rid of it. We know that it is protective. It helps to keep us safe, but so often it bubbles up or boils over at times when we are facing a challenge, we're faced with an opportunity, uncertainty, or something we care about, or all of the above. And so one of the things that I really am excited to do today is to help you to think outside of reducing, understanding, managing anxiety and moving forward, as we often talk about around our values, but also to really help support you with your own personal well-being. And so I really think that today's episode is going to be one of those episodes that will really change the way you think about it. And of course, what I always hope is that it will change what you're doing. Soon you will understand exactly what I mean. But before I introduce my wonderful guest, I'm going to read an excerpt from her award-winning book, Resilience Recipes, Making Space for Wellbeing That Works. And I just want to give you the quick heads up that I'm reading from page 7 and 8 of this brilliant book. There are a couple of little parts that I'm skipping over. You don't get a fresh, warm, fragrant loaf of bread by Googling bread making instructions. You don't get a flourishing garden of vegetables by reading the instructions on the back of a packet of seeds. You need to plant your seeds. What you get from planting your seeds is the potential for bounty beyond your imagination. With regular attention, those tiny shoots will turn into resilient seedlings that will continue to grow under all elements. Not all seeds will turn into shoots. Not all seedlings will transform into vegetables, but some will. The more you experiment, the more you learn about what works and what doesn't, and over time, your garden grows and flourishes. Joining me today is Fleur Heazlewood. Fleur is a leadership expert, speaker, founder of the Blueberry Institute, and two-time author dedicated to working with organisations to build healthy, high-performance cultures where employees thrive and commercial success does too. Fleur, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
The excerpt that I read from your book, I think really speaks to this idea of amplifying our well-being requires effort, doesn't it? And I'd love you to start by defining well-being and really what it takes to improve it for ourselves.
One of the challenges with well-being is that there actually isn't one universally agreed definition. So the academics, the scientists, the medical professionals, most of the people that write about well-being or wellness and tend to use it interchangeably don't all work from, I guess, a common set of factors or a common definition. And so one of the biggest challenges that we have is unless we define well-being for ourselves, we're actually not going to be able to improve it. So the definition of well-being that I work with and that I like has 4 elements. So the first part is around feeling good. So that's your emotions, your mental health, I guess your overall feeling temperature. Functioning well. And so what I mean by functioning well is your ability to do the things that you want to be able to do and participate in the kind of things that you want to be able to participate in well. But then the other 2 elements are really important too, because it's just not about being happy in the moment and being fit and physically healthy. There's an element which is around feeling connected. So you've got your social connections, you've got strong friendships and supports around you, and you're also contributing. So you're providing value, but you're also feeling valued for what you do. And so I tend to find that a really well-rounded definition of well-being that encapsulates the things that matter the most includes those 4 things.
Oh, look, I love that you've made it so clear for us because You're right. When we think about well-being, it's a construct, isn't it? It's like the weather. And we have temperature and humidity and wind and UV, and there are moving parts that contribute to it. And you've been able to give us 4 key areas to think about. And I hope you as a listener are starting to think, well, where am I with my psychological and emotional well-being? Where am I with my physical and functional well-being? And I turn 50 next year, Fleur, and I guess I've always been fit and healthy and looked after myself and exercised, but I'm becoming more and more aware of how important my physical functioning is for the life that I want to lead. And I'm constantly checking in with my psychological health. But you also obviously talked about connection and how important it is for us to be connected with the people that we care about, who care about us, and also giving and valuing others, but also feeling valued. So I know that you have personal experience of getting a bit wobbly with your own well-being, haven't you? It's funny, we often make work from our wounds, as one guest once said. And I think that I know I have. I have had anxiety for my whole life, and I feel so passionate about really empowering people in a way that I wasn't. And I guess I want to break this next question up into sort of 2 parts. Number 1, could you please, in a moment, explain what happened? And also, secondly, is that what sort of is a driving force for you, I suppose, with the wonderful work that you do?
You're absolutely spot on in that well-being is a construct. So it's not something that's static, it's dynamic. Well-being is not something that you have 1 second and you don't have the next second. We all have degrees of well-being that'll go up and down depending on what's going on in our life, and also depending on our life circumstances or the situations that we face, the backgrounds that we come from, our coping skills, our resources. There's a whole multitude of things that's going to make a really big difference as to why my well-being and definition of well-being and what it feels like is going to be completely different to yours, and is going to be completely different to other listeners that are sharing this conversation with us. And so, for example, well-being for a parent with their first baby is probably going to be revolving a lot around sleep and a healthy baby, figuring out how things are actually going to go and help around the house. Whereas well-being for someone who maybe has just left home for the first time and has started their first full-time job is going to be very much around, how do I fit in? How do I figure out these skills at work? How do I work out, what I want to do in terms of career? How do I actually make financial ends meet when this is the first time I've had to figure out how to run a household for myself? So each of us is completely different. And that's my starting point, because each of us are going to have different drivers and different resources. And so where I come from, or how I come to this space, is because I experienced quite dramatic and severe burnout. It was close to around 15 years or so ago. So I like to call myself a bit of an early adopter of burnout. Not that this is something that I want anyone to feel like as any kind of badge or of honour or medal, because it most certainly is not.
Yes.
That I experienced burnout before burnout was actually defined as a term. And so I had one of those slippery, slidey kind of roads into burnout. And there's also same thing again, where it's 1 second you're well and the next you are full on in a burnout kind of mode. It's one of those things that creeps up on you if you're not vigilant, you don't have good boundaries and structures and supports in place. And so for me, I was very much in that career building trajectory. We had a lot of external environmental things that were going on at the time. So restructures, and business wasn't going so great. And there was an expectation that as a team, as a leadership team, we would be putting in that over and above and discretionary work to try and help the company right itself and become on course. As part of that, we had restructures like most people are experiencing these days, redundancies, people coming and going and so forth. And there was very much this expectation that was put on my shoulders, particularly as I was young and I didn't have the same family commitments as other people would. There was an expectation that for myself in particular, I had the capacity and the space and the lack of family commitments to be able to put that extra effort into work. And so similar to you and many of our listeners, anxiety is part of my history and part of my journey. And so along with that came a healthy dose of perfectionism. So when you put anxiety, perfectionism, expectation and, I guess, very specific directives around what needed to be done to keep the company going, I found myself on this slippery slope of working longer and longer hours during the week, working on my weekends as well to catch up on things that I wasn't on top of. I was also in a role where I had global lines of reporting. So I was doing conference calls, so like 6 a.m. in the morning and 7 p.m. at night to make sure that we all stayed connected and in the loop. And I was also in that place where I tended to take any kind of mistakes or failures personally. So if something went wrong, I would be micromanaging it to right it and put it back on track. I was also in a reasonably toxic environment where I was experiencing some bullying for those that thought I was too young to be in my role. And I also was in a place where there were many, I guess, colleagues of a similar level that had a bit of envy or a bit of jealousy and wanted the same kind of roles that I was applying for, that would do anything they possibly could to pull the rug out from underneath me. So when we're looking at things like burnout, there's a combination of things in your environment. So in I think it was 2019, the World Health Organization finally diagnosed burnout as a health syndrome, and one of those is around your work environment. So I certainly didn't have a healthy work environment. But one of the things I think that's really helpful for us to be discussing today as well is that we all have some personal factors that will make us more or less susceptible to burnout. So things like anxiety, rumination, over-worry, perfectionism, those kind of tendencies where we're taking on more of that, almost like that mental and emotional load than we should be or need to be, is going to make us more susceptible to burnout. So for me, over a period of 18 months, the rest and recovery time basically went. And when I did attempt to sort of like put down the worries of work, my mind would kick into overdrive. So from just a general health, habits, restoration type of perspective, I really was not in a good place, and I certainly didn't have the skills to do with that. And there was also very much a lack of understanding around what burnout was and how it related. And so my path back to good health actually took me almost 18 months of visiting a number of different practitioners and putting together, I guess, step by step, the things that I needed to do to become well again, but also starting to learn and figure out the skills that I needed to ensure that I wouldn't be back in that kind of place again. And so resilience recipes for me is very much around, well, my wish anyway, is to help others not to go as far down that slippery slope as I did, to actually be able to develop some coping skills for maybe when your stress meter is getting a little bit out of control, or you're getting to the point where you've got less than half a tank full of energy, and to be able to recognize those signs and do something before you hit the train wreck that I found myself in.
Fleur, thank you for sharing what evolved and developed over time as you were under so much pressure and had so many balls in the air. I just can picture so many balls in the air for you and a lot of stress. And I wonder if you could help our listeners to recognize what the first part of that slippery slope looks and feels like as you're kind of heading in that direction of burnout, and what full-blown burnout, I've got nothing left, actually looks and feels like. Are you happy to share how people might sort of see some of those red flags on the way and what it's like when you get there?
So one of the things I find really interesting about burnout now is we've got much greater awareness around what it is, which I think is a really, really helpful thing when it comes to doing something different about it. And it's much more acceptable to talk in a working context and to be able to put it out there as, I guess, a right and an expectation that self-care is just as important as work. But one of the challenges I find with burnout is many people are bandying around burnout when what they mean is actually exhaustion. And there's actually 3 parts and 3 stages to burnout. So the first one is exhaustion, but it's not just physical exhaustion. It's mental, emotional. You kind of like lose a little bit of your spark, as well as physical exhaustion. So the way I experienced it was just a complete and utter dead weight and heavy weariness across all aspects of my life. So the first part, or when you're starting to, I guess, start thinking about, hey, is the way that I'm going at the moment good and healthy for me and nourishing me and my energy? If you're starting to feel that overwhelming sense of exhaustion and it's been sitting with you for a while, that's probably the first sign that you're heading towards burnout, even if you might not be in burnout yet. The second part of burnout is a real sense of disconnection and disengagement. And so for me, I was finding it difficult to get excited and enthusiastic about things that I would usually care passionately about. I was also finding it really hard to find the motivation and the enthusiasm to apply to projects that I cared about at work, and also found myself starting to cancel social engagements that I would usually really enjoy doing with friends and family, because I just did not have any kind of like spark or energy to engage in it. And even while on a cognitive level, I knew that it would be good for me and I knew that it would feel better, I was just in this sense of apathy and numbness that just like says, you know what, it just doesn't matter right now. I cannot find the energy and the motivation to join in. So that's our kind of part 2 stage. And I'm giving these to you in the order that I experience them.
Yes.
And then the third one is a lack of, I would call, functioning. So when we talked about my definition of well-being, there was the feeling good and the functioning well. And when we're in this place of burnout, we're not feeling good, and we're also finding that we're not even able to function well, but not even functioning. And so there's 2 parts to that. So for me, the first part was I stopped participating in the kinds of things that I enjoy doing outside of work, because I was just too exhausted and too numb, and it was too much for me. But from a work perspective and an everyday activities perspective, I was also finding that it was taking me longer to get things done than it usually would. I wasn't able to get through everything on my plate that I would consider to be a reasonable task list for the day. I was making mistakes. I was forgetting things. I was dropping the ball on things. I was forgetting conversations that I had with people. I was letting people down. I was letting myself down because I was just finding that it was harder and harder to get things done. So that's the 3 parts with examples from my own experience around how we can start to recognize the early stages, or potentially, even if we're quite a fair way down the burnout trajectory.
Yes, I think it's really important for people listening to be able to recognize where they might be at if they're on that path, and also their colleagues and friends and family, because what you've described are some kind of waypoints, aren't they? We want to catch people as early as possible. We want people to have the knowledge and the understanding so that they can recognize when they are on that slippery slope and in need of some help. But it's not always straightforward, is it, when it comes to getting help? And I know you've written about some of the things that stand in the way, because we'll ultimately take this conversation to some practical ideas for people. But before we get to that point, I'd love you to talk about what can stand in the way of people looking after themselves, taking care of their well-being, because we can know what to do, but still not be able to put it into practice if we can't kind of see the wood for the trees.
One of the biggest challenges I find when it comes to prioritising our own well-being is that we tend to prioritise everything else around us first. And so for me, with my burnout, it was putting in that extra effort, because we were in the face of some quite strong market pressure. Market was declining, redundancies and so forth. So there was this real sense of needing to deserve and own your job and own your role, which was my key driver for continuously putting myself last. And if we look at the current circumstances that we're in, we have more people than ever that are experiencing burnout. And one of the biggest mindsets that we have is, I just need to get through this period of time and then I can focus on my well-being. And we've got a lot of exhausted, burnt out people at the moment, because if we go back, 4 or so years ago, in Australia anyway, our summer of 2019, 2020, we had quite severe bushfire summer, and everyone was going, well, we just need to get through. We need to support the community. And once we've got through our bushfire summer, we can then take a breath. And then straight off the back of bushfire summer, COVID hit. And I'm not sure if you recall, Jodie, the beginning of COVID, and our view was very much around, oh, well, this will be about 2 or 3 months. So let's figure this out together. Let's put in our superhuman effort. And when COVID's finished in 3 months' time, we can then take a break and recharge. And then, of course, what's ended up happening is COVID and the pandemic rolled and got more severe. We had to figure out how to go from working at work to working at home to homeschooling children. It was just sort of one thing on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. And of course, many of us were isolated or locked up in our houses. So even if we wanted to take a break or a holiday, we didn't have anywhere to go. And so one of the things that's really worrying me at the moment, one of the biggest barriers that we face, is many of us have this mindset that I just need to go through this and then I can do self-care and then I can do well-being. But the reality is we've now come into this period of economic uncertainty, financial stress, and people are worrying about their jobs again. And our workplaces and the people around us are asking us to dig deep again, and we've actually got nothing back in the tank. And so if we continue on with this mindset that well-being is something that we do after we've got through something or after the results or after we've figured something out, we're going to burn out in faster and greater quantities than we ever had before. And so one of the things that I would really love to leave with you and our listeners today is that well-being should be viewed as an investment. And well-being is very much what I call an enabler of performance, not a reward for results. And so while we continue to think of well-being as something that we shoehorn in at the end, and we can give ourselves as a reward, so we got through COVID, or it's something that when everything's been done for the week, we can maybe put 30 minutes at the end of week for ourselves, we're going to continue to burn ourselves down. So the reality that I'd like to share with people, and I think it's really, really sad, but I've spent a lot of time reading and investing in the business case for why we should put well-being first. And so there's a lot of research now that's come out of Harvard University. So we're talking about 10 to 15 years worth of research, but it still doesn't seem to be making that much of a difference yet on an everyday basis, is that if we invest in our happiness and our well-being first, then things like our innovation, our creativity, our productivity, the strength of our relationships, our ability to secure and gain promotions and basically perform better in life and work increases by anywhere between 9 and 27%. And so for me, I think our biggest barrier to well-being is that we've got our well-being equation round the wrong way. We talk about work-life balance, but there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's all life, and work needs to have an appropriately sized wedge within it.
Oh, that is the very best representation of the work-life balance kind of myth that I've ever heard. And I was at a conference last week, and one lady was saying what she thought about it, and other people saying it's just a blend. I really want to just emphasize that we have our lives, and work is one appropriately sized wedge within it. And Fleur, look, the way you speak about it, that's why I was so excited to have this chance to talk with you. One of the things I guess I would like to invite listeners to think about is, what are you waiting for if you are waiting for this next big thing to be finished? We all know in our life that before that next big thing is finished, another big thing has begun. There really isn't ever a lull, a pause. And if there is, that's not enough. It's something that requires daily effort and daily investment, because we benefit from it in so many different ways when we do that. It does take effort, and I'm really excited that you're able to share some tips with us today. When it comes to our well-being, we can create a plan that is individual to us, can't we? We don't have to tick certain things off a list. Now, I know you're going to share some tips, but could you just speak to the idea that we've got to find the right fit for what works for us?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've tried to do within Resilience Recipes is make it a deliberately small book with some curated, simple, evidence-based. So what I mean is there's research behind it to say that these different activities work for the different wellbeing objectives that we have, to make it easy for people. And so one of the things I tend to find is people tend to get a little bit frozen in this all or nothing kind of paradigm. It's like, okay, use resolution. I'm going to exercise, for an hour every day. And we know that if we don't change something, then fitting in an hour of exercise every day within our existing routine is going to fall off the rails pretty quickly. And what happens is we brand ourselves a failure and we give up. We don't even try. And so some tips that I'm going to share with you today are how we can get a little bit smarter about wellbeing, what we choose and how we do it, so that we're more likely to set ourselves up for success as opposed to setting ourselves up for failure. And so the first one very much is around picking, I guess, the one thing that is going to make the most difference for you at the moment. And so many of us think, when we're particularly thinking about wellbeing plans, we think about physical fitness and exercise. But if you're someone who's got a lot on your plate and actually stress is what is causing you the most grief in your life, then probably developing a breathing or a mindfulness practice, or doing some reflection by developing a third space practice for 5 minutes twice a day is going to be a lot more beneficial for you. So we want to be picking the right things for what's going on for us. And we also want to be picking small bite-sized pieces that we can start with to build up some success. So a couple of the big things that I'm a really big fan of is just picking one thing at a time. So in the past, I've been really good at going, all right, I'm going to overhaul my eating. I'm going on a fitness trip, and instead of just meditating first thing in the morning, I'm going to do like some kind of meditation at the end of the night. So we go from sort of like nothing to trying to fit 2 hours worth of stuff into our day. So how we set ourselves up for success is just picking one thing, and we start small. And when I say start small, particularly if it's something like starting to meditate, one of the things that research shows us is that 5 minutes a day is more powerful than 45 minutes or 60 minutes on the weekend. So we don't have to find in our already busy days 60 minutes. We actually just need bite-size or snack-size pieces for our objectives. And so what's key to building a healthy and successful habit is actually picking one thing, embedding it down, finding a place for it in our routine, finding the 5 or 10 minutes and persisting with it until it becomes a default, and then adding another one. So if anyone would like to learn a little bit more about this, Atomic Habits by James Clear is a really good, and same thing again, it's a really good evidence-based book for how we can create the tiny habits that's going to make a big difference. Because it's actually the incremental 1%ers that add up, not this like all or nothing, I'm going to start exercising for an hour every day. The other thing as well is I'm a very big fan of building these things into our morning routine. And I know we've all got different circadian rhythms, so some people are night larks and other people are morning owls and so forth. But one of the things that we know is that willpower is actually a little bit like a muscle, and it's also a finite resource. And so it's a lot easier to invest in yourself and choose yourself and to put some boundaries around your priorities in the morning when your willpower is at its highest. So before you've started depleting it by saying no or trying to accommodate and figure out everything else that's going on. And it's also a lot easier to contribute to your wellbeing activities or exercises before your day becomes out of control. I don't know about you, Jodie, but I don't know anyone who sort of like wakes up in the morning, has got this perfectly laid out day, and then gets to the end of it and goes, awesome, it went exactly the way that I wanted to,
Never.
on time, and, I achieved everything that I wanted to, and now my energy is absolutely amazing, so it's 9 o'clock at night and I'm going to hit that 24-hour gym. It's not realistic. So there's a few things that we can do to be a little bit smart.
Oh my goodness. I love that. You just reminded me the other day when I came home and I'd won the morning. I was feeling fantastic, super organized. I walked in the door and my daughter's lunch was on the bench, and I felt like, I've been derailed and I haven't even sat down at my desk. I took the food to school for her, and She came home that night. She said, I actually had already packed my lunch, Mum. I'd packed an extra one for her because she was running late anyway. So, yes, it so easily happens. And yes, and I remember reading Atomic Habits, and something that really stuck with me, and I think it also gives us this little bit of dopamine that we're looking for. That's why we reach for our Instagram or we're checking on our emails and things. I think something that might also give us that little bit of dopamine is this idea that you could get a whiteboard, get a piece of paper, create a calendar, or on the calendar that you use if you have one, is each day that you do the activity that you said that you would do, even if it's 3 beautiful breaths in the morning after you've cleaned your teeth, then put a little X or put a little tick or put a little smiley face. And each day that you do that, you are building on your streak. And we really like to have a streak as humans. And so even just something like that I remember from reading in Atomic Habits is a nice way to, like you said, embed something that's going to make a difference to your well-being in each and every day. A little bit often is so much better than doing a lot, like you said, once or twice on the weekend, doing a meditation session or going for a walk. Or it's got to be consistency and it's got to be done frequently. I love your approach, Fleur. And when I think about well-being and knowing that there is so much evidence around what contributes to well-being, and you've talked about mindfulness and you've talked about exercise and you've talked about the breath. If listeners are on this journey and they'd like to add a little extra something to their day or to their routine in the morning, if they've chosen one thing and embedded it, or if perhaps some listeners will be going, right, I'm going to start with one, but then I might like to add in another a little bit down the track. Can you share a couple of other tips of daily practices, nice small ones, that will make a difference to people's well-being over time?
Yeah, there's 5 what I would call almost like superfood well-being practices, where even just 5 or 10 minutes can make a really, really big difference. And so we talked about the breath and mindfulness. One of the great things about a breathing practice or a mindfulness practice is it's fabulous for down regulating our body. It's great for creating some space, especially when the rumination cycle or our to-do lists are a little bit out of control in our heads. It's great for clarity, but it's also really good for helping us to recharge our mental energy. So in just 5 to 10 minutes worth of breathing or mindfulness, it actually packs a really big superfood punch. Ditto with exercise. While we tend to associate exercise with physical fitness, it's also one of the best ways that we can shake up a mood. It's one of the best ways that we can actually get our bodies started in the morning. So for those of you who are interested in detoxing, the best way we can detox is to actually move. Completely random and fun fact, while we have our heart pumping the blood around in our body, we don't actually have anything that's pumping that stale energy and oxygen and all those different things that are like sitting there in our bodies. And so moving is our biggest muscle that's going to give us the quickest detox without getting caught up on silly lemon water kinds of diets and all the rest of it. So exercise is brilliant for a body detox, to recharge your mood, to change what your mind might be in the grips of, as well as physical exercise. Another really lovely practice that's an immediate boost for our well-being is practicing gratitude. So just starting your day, writing down 3 things that you're grateful for. And when we're talking about it's 3 different things to the day before. So we're looking specifically for new things that we can appreciate and be thankful for, is very much a really quick and fabulous way of starting to rewire our brains to look for the positives first, as opposed to the risks and the negatives. So particularly for those of us who are predisposed to anxiety and we're looking for the risks, this is a really lovely way to balance that thinking out. And what it actually does is it opens up our neural pathways, it opens up our optimism, and it also means that we're less likely to go, yeah, I actually can do this exercise and healthy routine, as opposed to sort of like drowning ourselves in all the other things that might be a little bit too noisy. And if we turn that gratitude practice into something that we do with our families at night around the dinner table, not only are we training ourselves to be more optimistic and open-minded and successful, but we're also instilling that in our families. And of course, we get this amazing connection, and we deepen our intimacy and our relationships with our families because we're talking about things that really, really matter. So not only are we getting that dopamine hit, we're also getting that oxytocin hit as well. So it doesn't have to be difficult. So the way I like to start my mornings, or how I describe it, is like moving my mind, moving my body, and moving my soul. So if you just pick three things, 3, 5, 10-minute things to do for that, you'll find that the trajectory for the rest of your day is more likely to be an upwards one as opposed to a downwards one.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned 5, and I was so engrossed in what you were saying. I just want to reflect because I was starting to write them down. Mindfulness, breathing, exercise, gratitude, and I missed the 5th.
And then the 5th one, which we didn't get to because we were too excited in this conversation, so that's awesome. I think most people have probably heard of this concept of random acts of kindness. I'm actually very big on conscious acts of kindness. And so one of the things that research shows us is doing things for others and thinking about others is not only a great way of improving their lives or their day or their emotions in the moment, but it's actually one of the most successful ways that we can feel connected. And this is one of those areas that contributes to our feeling of contribution and connection. So that second half of the wellbeing definition that I gave you. And so conscious acts of kindness, there was a study out of Harvard University, same one, Sean Aker, if anyone's interested in checking him out, where for 21 days in a row, people were invited first thing in the morning before or when they jumped on their devices, before they started scrolling or looking at things, to send a message to someone thanking or praising them or sharing something that they appreciated about them before they got into the rest of their day. And so one of the wonderful things about that is you're consciously looking for the good. You're consciously checking into your connections and your social resources. You're actually realizing just how many people that you have in your network. And by sharing something positive with them, you're also likely to receive that lovely oxytocin and reciprocity. I'm a shocker when it comes to pronouncing that. Reciprocity back.
Yes.
So if we do a little mix of those 5 superfoods, we're going to find that we're going to boost our feeling good. So that gratitude and conscious acts of kindness, that functioning well. So the exercise, the mindfulness and the breathing, the feeling connected, and also that contribution.
Oh, I just am feeling so joyful now at the way you talk about well-being and the 4 ways that we can contribute to our well-being, the 4 aspects of well-being, and these 5 ideas that are just so powerful. And I did record an episode that has a very unusual name, and it's called A Latte with 6 Sugars, Please, is what I called the episode. And it was because I wandered by a fellow who looked to me like he didn't own the keys to a home. And I just was getting a coffee and I said, hey, can I get you a coffee? And he said, a latte with 6 sugars, please, when I asked him exactly what coffee he wanted. And just the fact that when I returned to give him his coffee, and I'd also bought a beautiful fresh raspberry muffin for him, and I went to give it to him, he already had in his hands a beautiful coffee and a muffin. Somebody else had done it before me. And I share that story because I'm elevated and feel excited and have experienced positive emotions at the idea of witnessing an act of kindness. It wasn't so much about what I was doing, even though that felt good, even though I'm like, what are we going to do with these? Like, let me put them beside you. You can have these later. It's a lot of sugar. Yeah, just this idea that somebody else had thought to do that just really elevates me. And I know I'm not alone, and I know the science speaks so loudly when it comes to these acts of kindness. So I love, love, love that that's part of what you've shared. Could you please just briefly talk to us about the connection between well-being and resilience?
So one of the challenges with resilience, which is exactly like well-being, is that there is also no unanimously agreed definition of resilience. And so we hear resilience being, thrown around a lot, even when recruitment, I'm starting to find questions when people are talking about going for jobs where they're saying, are you resilient or not? And I think resilience kind of like gets a bit of a bad rap because it's not understood or necessarily, I guess, used properly, even though properly is not a great word. If we actually lean into resilience and understand that it's actually a skill set that's going to help us to better cope with pressure, to support us in terms of taking perspective when times are tough, and look at it as an essential part of keeping our energy on track, we'll actually start to realize that not only is resilience a set of skills as opposed to something that we have or we don't, but investing in our resilience and developing our resilient skills is going to be one of the best ways that we're going to be able to keep our well-being on an even keel, even when times may be tough. So I like to describe resilience as a set of helpful strategies that anyone can develop or improve or learn or build more of, that's going to support us when times are tough, so we can draw down on our resilience reserves when things aren't going so well, and that we invest in when things are going well to top up our tanks. So when it comes to feeling good, having some coping strategies for stress is really, really important. When it comes to functioning well, being able to see other options and seek out other connections when maybe we've been struggling to see the wood for the trees because we've got, too many terrible things happening at a time is going to be really helpful. To ensure that we have these healthy morning routines where we've got our snack-sized, bite-sized pieces of wellbeing activities that nurture our soul are going to be really helpful for us to be able to maintain our energy when the going gets tough. And as we talked about, we've had sort of like 4 years worth of the going gets tough, and it doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon. And so I think that resilience is something that we can all look at and learn the different skill sets that are going to enable us to navigate life's up and downs a little bit better and to help our well-being to stay more stable and less rocky.
Thank you so much. You have given us a really good understanding of well-being, a really practical way to think about well-being, what we can do, how to get started, and this idea of starting small, being consistent, and really how what we do to support our well-being feeds into our resilience. It's time to stop and just to take a little bit of a moment to think about what you can start as a result of listening to Fleur today that will start to kind of invest into your own self-care, your own well-being, and your own resilience, because everything that we can do for ourselves will help to buoy us and strengthen us to continue to cope as times are challenging, but also elevate us well beyond where we would be if we just keep waiting. So Fleur, your insights and ideas today have been just, so appreciated. And how can people connect with you and find out more about you and learn about your books?
I would love to connect with people on Instagram, just Fleur Heazlewood, or LinkedIn if it's more of a work context. To check out my books and programs, head to blueberryinstitute.com. So Blueberry, Antioxidants Institute, evidence-based ones that are going to help you and your teams to feel better. I always get asked, why Blueberry Institute?
I love it. And when I saw the name of your organisation, I thought, I think I know exactly why Fleur has chosen Blueberry for the name, and you've just confirmed that because, it's synonymous with great health and wellbeing.
Thank you. And if you'd like to buy my books, it's available in Dymocks and most independent bookstores in Australia at the moment. Also Booktopia online and Amazon online. So whatever your preference is for where you buy books, you'll find them there. And so resilience recipes will help you to determine the personal wellbeing plan that's going to work for where you are right now. So it's designed to be a quick start guide to help you figure out what your definition of wellbeing is, what's most important for you, and just pick that one thing to get started with. And then leading wellbeing is very much around when you recognise that maybe yourself or others are a little bit wobbly. So whether that be chronic stress or on the burnout trajectory, or you're worried potentially around mental health issues, it's your conversation guide to how you can reach out and support people around you and help them to get the help that they need for when they're starting to become mentally unwell.
Thank you, Fleur, and thank you, listeners. Thanks again for your company, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.